All right, so buckle up, listeners, because today we're diving into a real head scratcher.
Oh, yeah.
You sent us this YouTube video, and this guy, Jason Statham, a.k.a. Baja the Inquisitor.
Intense.
Yeah, like, whoa, this guy brings the energy.
Uh-huh.
But he also drops this phrase, this based mantra.
Okay.
There's nothing to push away. There's nothing to hold on to. It's like he's trying to short circuit my brain. What do you make of it? Ever heard anything like it?
It's definitely provocative. And Statham, he kind of dives right into the deep end with it, connecting it to neuroscience.
Okay.
And the whole idea of like chasing happiness. And
Yeah.
he even brings up nihilism, which, buckle up, listener, because we're going there.
Nihilism. Okay, we are definitely going to unpack that one
Yep.
later. But first, this whole based mantra thing, it's like he's saying, like, trying to force good vibes all the time and, like, ignore all the bad stuff. That's just setting us up for failure.
Yeah, he's tapping into this key idea, the impermanence of everything.
Okay.
He even uses this analogy of like clinging to a high school victory, like those glory days we all secretly, or not so secretly, miss.
Right, like, remember when I peaked?
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the point is, holding on to these peaks as if they'll last forever just sets us up for disappointment.
Right.
And then on the flip side, dwelling on the lows, like that doesn't help either.
Right, so it's both. It's like he's saying the good and the bad are fleeting, so
Yeah.
don't get too attached to either.
Don't get too attached.
Okay, that tracks. He actually uses the example of, like, having a kid. Like, obviously, that's a huge life event, maybe one of the biggest eyes you can experience.
Absolutely.
But he's saying even that feeling, as amazing as it is, that won't last forever in that initial, like, all-consuming way.
Yeah.
That's kind of a downer, isn't it?
Well, it's not about diminishing the joy of these big moments.
Right.
But rather recognizing that this based mantra encourages us not to expect that initial high to be our, like, new baseline.
Oh, interesting.
Like, think about it this way. If you're always chasing that first-time feeling,
Mm-hmm.
you're setting yourself up for disappointment when, like, real life, sets in.
Right.
And that goes for the negative stuff, too, right?
Yeah.
We get stuck ruminating, replaying bad experiences.
Oh, for sure.
And that just keeps us in the muck.
So is this based mantra about finding a way to be okay with those highs and lows, to kind of like ride the waves without getting completely wiped out?
Exactly. And it's not about becoming indifferent to everything.
Okay.
It's more about, like, shifting our relationship to our experiences,
Yep.
both the exhilarating and the exhausting.
Okay, explain that one to me, because if someone cuts me off in traffic,
Uh-huh.
I'm going to feel some kind of way about it. My blood pressure goes up just thinking about it. That's just human nature, right?
Absolutely. And Statham acknowledges that, he even uses this phrase, and it's a tough one, I'll admit, see it as a neutral object.
See it as a neutral object.
Which, let's be honest, it's easier said than done.
Yeah.
But imagine if you could just acknowledge the anger
Right.
at the reckless driver
Right.
without letting it ruin your entire day.
What if you could just let it go, like a wave crashing on the shore?
So it's like, I'm still feeling the anger, that surge of adrenaline,
Yeah.
but I'm not letting it control me.
Exactly. Exactly. You're acknowledging the wave without getting swept away by it.
I like that.
And the wild thing is, Statham suggests that over time, with practice, this radical acceptance can actually lessen suffering. It's almost like transcending the duality of pain and pleasure.
Oh.
Have you ever noticed how sometimes joy and sorrow can exist at the same time?
Now that you mention it, I've definitely experienced that.
Yeah.
Like, after a loss, you might feel intense grief, but also these moments of gratitude for the good times.
Right.
It's a strange mix of emotions, but
Yeah,
it's also
it
kind of
is.
beautiful. Exactly. And that's where this based mantra, this idea of radical acceptance, can lead to a whole new way of experiencing life.
Okay, now we're getting into some high-level stuff.
Yeah.
But I have to ask, isn't there a danger here? Like, if you take his words too literally, does that mean you just, like, sit back and let bad things happen?
Right.
What about taking action, fighting for what you believe in? Doesn't this go against, actually living life?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Right.
And to be fair to Statham, he does kind of address this.
Okay.
He says it's not about, like, being passive,
Right.
but rather about choosing how we respond to things rather than just, like, reacting.
Okay, so it's like you're not denying reality or
Yeah.
slapping on a fake smile,
Yeah,
but you're also not letting it turn you into a passive observer in your own life.
exactly. Yeah, like you're finding that space between what happens to us and then how we choose to engage with it, right?
You know what this reminds me of?
What's that?
That old saying, you can't control the cards you're dealt, only how you play them.
Right.
Is that kind of what Statham is getting at?
There's definitely a connection there, yeah.
Okay.
But we also have to remember that he brings up nihilism,
Right.
which, takes us down a whole other rabbit hole.
Okay, yeah,
Yeah.
we can't just gloss over that because
Yeah.
he kind of throws out the N-word there, nihilism, like it's just another Tuesday.
Yeah, he does.
And I have to admit, some of what he's saying, like if you take it out of context,
Yeah.
it could sound kind of bleak. Like if nothing really matters, then why bother doing anything? Why even get out of bed in the morning?
That's the challenge with this kind of stuff, right?
Right.
Because on the surface, this based mantra might sound a bit like nihilism, right? A philosophy that says, like, life is meaningless. Maybe.
Yeah, right.
But Statham walks that line very carefully.
Okay.
He even addresses it directly, but at one point he says something like, you can do this without becoming a nihilist.
Okay, so he's saying it's possible to, like, embrace this radical acceptance thing
Yeah.
without falling into a pit of despair,
Right.
without thinking that nothing you do matters anyway.
That's where things get really interesting, because Statham seems to be suggesting that true freedom comes
Okay.
not from, like, ignoring the difficult realities of life,
Right.
but from facing them head on,
Okay.
but without letting them, like, dictate our experience. It's like he's found a way to operate on a different frequency,
Okay.
one where he can acknowledge the full spectrum of human experience,
Okay.
the good, the bad, the ugly,
Yeah.
but without getting, like, swept away by the emotional undertow.
Okay, I'm picking up what you're putting down.
Okay, good.
But for us mere mortals,
Yeah.
just trying to get through the day, this all sounds a bit advanced.
Right.
Like, do you have to reach some higher plane of consciousness to make this work?
That's a great question. And I think this is where Statham maybe unintentionally
Yeah.
opens a door for all of us.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Like, he doesn't present this based mantra as some exclusive club
Right.
for, like, enlightened beings.
Right. Right.
In fact, he kind of frames it as something that anyone can access, regardless of, like, their spiritual beliefs or background or whatever.
So what, we just start repeating this mantra like a broken record and hope for the best?
Well, he does seem to believe in the power of repetition. I mean,
Right.
he calls it a mantra for a reason.
Right.
Right.
But I think it goes deeper than just the words themselves.
Okay.
It's about cultivating a certain, like, quality of mind, right?
Okay.
A way of perceiving and interacting with the world that's just less reactive and more responsive.
Got it. So less knee-jerk reactions, more intentional responses.
Exactly.
But how do we actually do that? Because it's all well and good to talk about radical acceptance and, like, shifting your relationship to suffering and all that.
Right.
But how do you actually put that into practice when, say, you get that rejection email?
Or your favorite sports team loses again.
That's where the rubber meets the road, right?
Right.
And I think this is where some of the other things he touches on in the video come into play. Like,
Right, yeah.
he talks about the importance of understanding how our brains are wired,
Okay.
how we're actually, like, biologically predisposed towards negativity.
Right, like that whole negativity bias thing.
Yes, exactly.
Our brains tend to focus on the bad stuff more than the good.
Exactly. And Statham seems to be suggesting that by understanding this inherent negativity bias, right,
Okay.
we can start to challenge those automatic thought patterns
Right.
and choose a different way of responding.
Okay.
He even mentions practices like meditation and mindfulness,
All right.
which have been shown to help increase our awareness of our thought patterns and our emotional reactions.
So it's not just about adopting this mantra as, like, a belief system. It's
Yeah.
about training your mind to actually experience the world differently.
Precisely, yeah.
Yeah.
And that takes time and effort
Right.
and a lot of self-reflection.
For sure.
But the potential payoff, as Statham suggests, is a life where you're less controlled by external circumstances
Okay.
and more able to choose how you respond to whatever life throws your way.
This is making me think about that whole serenity prayer thing.
Okay.
The one about accepting the things you can't change,
Right.
courage to change the things you can, and the wisdom to know the difference.
Right.
Is this based mantra basically a more, shall we say, intense version of that?
I think there are definitely some parallels there.
Yeah.
And I think that's what makes this based mantra so intriguing,
Yeah.
It's tapping into something that's been explored in various spiritual and philosophical traditions for centuries.
Right.
This idea of finding peace and freedom,
Okay.
not by changing the world around us, but by changing our relationship to it.
So it's like, instead of trying to bend the world to our will,
Yeah.
we learn to bend ourselves,
Yeah.
which, let's be honest, is probably the harder path, right?
It can be, yeah, but it can also be incredibly empowering.
True.
And that might explain why Statham seems so fired up about it.
Yeah,
He's basically saying, look, life is tough, but you're tougher.
I like that.
Uh-huh.
But it also makes me wonder, like, if we do manage to embrace this radical acceptance,
Yeah?
if we do somehow learn to transcend the duality of pain and pleasure,
What then? Like, what does life even look like at that point?
that, my friend, is the million-dollar question.
Right.
And I think it's one that each of us kind of has to answer for ourselves.
Right.
But maybe that's the most based aspect of this whole thing.
All right, so we've covered a lot of ground here, from neuroscience to nihilism to the wild ride that is Jason Statham's brain.
It's a trip, that's for sure.
But let's bring it back down to earth for a minute,
Okay.
Let's say you're listening to this right now and you're dealing with something heavy,
Yeah.
like a job loss, a breakup,
Right.
just life throwing you a curveball.
Life, yeah.
How would embracing this based mantra, this idea of radical acceptance, how would that actually help you?
That's the real question, right? Like, it's easy to talk about this stuff in the abstract, but when you're in it.
How do you actually apply it, right?
Exactly.
So imagine this, instead of spiraling, right,
Okay.
into panic mode
Yeah.
or getting stuck in that loop of self-blame,
Oh, yeah.
what if you could just take a breath,
Oh, okay.
acknowledge the situation without judgment,
Yeah.
and then just ask, okay, what's here? What's actually here right now?
Yeah.
What can I control in this moment?
So instead of feeling totally overwhelmed by everything, it's about finding some agency within it.
Yes, exactly.
That little bit of grounding, like right there in the middle of all the chaos.
Yeah, like that eye of the storm.
Yeah.
Right. You're not pretending the problem doesn't exist.
Yeah.
You're not pretending like your feelings aren't valid.
Yeah.
It's more like you're saying, okay, yeah, this is really tough.
Right.
And I'm still here. I still have choices to make.
Yeah.
Even if it's just how I choose to respond to this.
I like that. It's like finding that little sliver of light, in the darkness.
Yeah.
But I imagine it takes practice to get there, right? Like our brains aren't exactly wired for like instant zen
Right.
when, a crisis hits.
Yeah, it's a skill.
Right?
And like any skill, it requires consistent effort.
Right.
Statham talks about meditation, but there are other tools in the toolbox as well.
Okay.
Like mindfulness practices, cognitive reframing.
Yeah.
Even just like taking a walk in nature to kind of clear your head,
All right.
It's about finding what works for you.
Okay.
What helps you create that space
Right.
between stimulus and response,
Okay.
between what happens and how you react to it.
So it's not about becoming like some emotionless robot.
Right, exactly.
It's about becoming more aware of our emotions,
Yeah.
more intentional with how we respond to them.
100%.
It's like we're upgrading our operating system, right?
Yeah,
To be more resilient,
Yeah.
more adaptable to whatever life throws our way.
exactly.
And here's the thing about this whole base mantra thing, right?
Yeah,
It doesn't promise to like eliminate challenges or anything.
right.
Or make life a cakewalk,
No,
In fact, if you listen closely to Statham,
yeah.
he's pretty upfront about the fact that
Yeah.
suffering is a part of life.
It's a good way.
It's an inevitable part of the human experience,
It's going to happen, yeah.
It's not about avoiding the lows, but changing how we relate to them. Right. It's like he's saying, look, life's going to throw punches.
Yeah.
You're going to get knocked down sometimes.
Yeah,
But you get to decide how you get back up.
right. You have that choice.
Which, now that I say that out loud, it kind of sounds like a line from a cheesy motivational poster.
Maybe so, but there's a reason those cheesy lines resonate, right?
Right,
Because
yeah.
they often contain a grain of truth.
Yeah.
And I think that's what Statham, in his own unique and often intense way, is trying to convey.
Yeah.
He's not selling us some fantasy of eternal bliss or anything.
Right.
He's offering like a different way to relate to the messiness of life.
Okay.
A way to navigate it with more clarity, more agency, and perhaps even, bit of humor along the way.
Okay, I'm feeling a little more based already. But on that note, before we wrap things up, any final thoughts for our listeners out there who are thinking, all right, time to put this based mantra into practice?
For all his intensity, Statham said something that really stuck with me.
Okay.
He talked about how this approach, this based mantra,
Yeah.
it made life easier for him.
Okay.
And I don't mean easier in the sense of like fewer challenges,
Right.
but just easier in the sense that he just wasn't so reactive,
Okay.
not so easily swept away by the ups and downs.
Okay.
He even talked about reaching like a threshold
Yeah.
where suffering itself seem to diminish.
Interesting.
And I think that's an idea worth exploring.
Okay.
That maybe, just maybe, true freedom comes not from avoiding pain,
Right.
but from changing our relationship to it.
There you have it, listener. A crash course in based mantras, radical acceptance, and the art of not letting life completely derail you.
That's it.
Go forth and experiment.
Exactly.
And who knows, maybe you'll find your own way to make life a little bit more.
There you go.
Until next time, keep diving deep.